And we're right back, just as fast as an SSD. Actually, this Radeon program is on my SSD. Might be the reason why I can load it up so fast. Okay, all right, here we go.
I'm thinking it'll take less than a million rays a second to have a big impact on audio. That should be enough for audio occlusion and some reverb calculations.
Returnal.
With a bit more of the GPU invested in ray tracing, it should be possible to do some very nice global illumination. Having said that, adding ray-traced shadows and reflections to a traditional graphics engine could easily take hundreds of millions of rays a second, and full ray tracing could take billions. How far can we go? I'm starting to get quite bullish. I've already seen a PlayStation 5 title that's successfully using ray tracing based reflections in complex animated scenes with only modest costs. Another set of issues for the GPU involved size and frequency. How big do we make the GPU, and what frequency do we run it at? This is a balancing act. The chip has a cost, and there's a cost for whatever we use to supply that chip with power and to cool it. In general, I like running the GPU at higher frequency. Let me show you why. Here's two possible configurations for a GPU roughly of the level of the PlayStation 4 Pro. This is a thought experiment. Don't take these configurations too seriously. If you just calculate teraflops, you get the same number. But actually, the performance is noticeably different because teraflops is defined as the computational capability of the vector ALU. That's just one part of the GPU. There are a lot of other units. And those other units all run faster when the GPU frequency is higher. At 33% higher frequency, rasterization goes 33% faster. Processing the command buffer goes that much faster. The L2 and other caches have that much higher bandwidth, and so on. About the only downside is that system memory is 33% further away in terms of cycles. But the large number of benefits more than counterbalance that. As a friend of mine says, a rising tide lifts all boats. Also, it's easier to fully use 36 CUs in parallel than it is to fully use 48 CUs. When triangles are small, it's much harder to fill all those CUs with useful work. So there's a lot to be said for faster, assuming you can handle the resulting power and heat issues, which frankly, we haven't always done the best job at. Part of the reason for that is, historically, our process for setting CPU and GPU frequencies has relied on some heavy-duty guesswork with regards to how much electrical power games will consume and how much heat will be produced as a result inside of the console. Power consumption varies a lot from game to game. When I play God of War on my PS4 Pro, I know the power consumption is high just by the fan noise. But power isn't simply about engine quality. It's about the minutiae of what's being displayed and how. It's counterintuitive, but processing dense geometry typically consumes less power than processing simple geometry, which is, I suspect, why Horizon's map screen, with its low triangle count, makes my PS4 Pro heat up so much. Our process on previous consoles has been to try to guess what the maximum power consumption during the entire console lifetime might be, which is to say, the worst case scene in the worst case game, and prepare a cooling solution that we think will be quiet at that power level. If we get it right, fan noise is minimal. If we get it wrong, the console will be quite loud for the higher power games, and there's even a chance that it might overheat and shut down if we misestimate power too badly.
Okay, so in terms of power and heat, just about every single device, I would imagine. I know some phones used to blow up, but so when you're running your computer, your console, if you notice sometime your head of fans get really high, that's because whatever you're doing at that particular moment in that game, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of computing going on, and that CPU is heating up. The GPU and the CPU are getting hot because it's computing all that's going on in the screen. Again, everything on the screen is pixels and bits. Okay, so when you got a lot of stuff going on, or in some cases you could just be programmed poorly, um, the power, your power supply on your console will feed more power so that it can feed the GPU to power what's going on to the screen, right? But in some cases, it wouldn't be sufficient. and it will cause system failure. In the case of the Xbox 360, it was games. It wasn't tuned correctly, and games would heat up the console. Then we turn off for to cool it down, and it heated up too much, and then it cool it down, and heat it up too much, and cool it down to the thing. It'll shut down. Most consoles, when they get too hot, they will automatically shut down. If my computer gets too hot, I hear my fans going up too high, the game will either freeze and it'll shut it off because it's getting too hot. It's the power supply can it could blow up really if it has no limit to it, but it has like a limiter to it, and so it's only going to supply so much power to the GPU to the computer says, okay, hey woman, that's too much. Shut this thing down. So this is what he's talking about. Some games will, in some parts of the games, it will use more power, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if not fine tuned, it'll cause harm to the console.
PlayStation 5 is especially challenging because the CPU supports 256-bit native instructions that consume a lot of power. These are great here and there, but presumably only minimally used. Or are they? If we plan for major 256-bit instruction usage, we need to set the CPU clock substantially lower or noticeably increase the size of the power supply and fan.
So right there is what I was just talking about. So now you get into, okay, do we want to have the power? If we give it more power, I mean, if the GPU can do more, then it's going to need more power, meaning it's going to need more cooling. So now he's like, well, can we just have it run at max and come back to these other components and see if we can fine tune these other components to keep it at that rate. So I'm pretty sure he's going to explain that.
So after much discussion, we decided to go with a very different direction on PlayStation 5. We built a GPU with 36 CUs. Mind you, RDNA 2 CUs are large. Each has 62% more transistors than the CUs we were using on PlayStation 4. So if we compare transistor counts, 36 RDNA 2 CUs equates to roughly 58 PlayStation 4 CUs. It is a fairly sizable GPU.
Man.
Then we went with a variable frequency strategy for PlayStation 5, which is to say we continuously run the GPU and CPU in boost mode. We supply a generous amount of electrical power and then increase the frequency of GPU and CPU until they reach the capabilities of the system's cooling solution. It's a completely different paradigm. Rather than running at constant frequency and letting power vary based on the workload, we run at essentially constant power and let the frequency vary based on the workload. We then tackled the engineering challenge of a cost-effective and high-performance cooling solution designed for that specific power level. In some ways, it becomes a simpler problem because there are no more unknowns. There's no need to guess what power consumption the worst-case game might have. As for the details of the cooling solution, we're saving them for our teardown. I think you'll be quite happy with what the engineering team came up with. So, how fast can we run the GPU?
So there's a teardown video that's been out already. So he's like, let's keep it at max power, see how far we can push it there. That way you won't need the frequency to come in and tell it to do anything. Let's just keep it at a steady rate. Let's keep it at a steady boost clock, right? So let's keep it at a steady power and just keep grabbing from there. And it shouldn't go no higher than even that. That way you don't have to worry about it telling it. You don't have to worry about parts of the game telling it to, okay, give me more power here and go high, go ahead. Let's just get it there and keep it there at a steady rate. And then once you do that, though, you come from a compute level all the way to a hardware level. So then your hardware has to be in tune with that, which is, if you watch the teardown with this, you can see how the system actually cools itself. And while I was able to run it at full speed basically all the time, according to this, and not get hot as of yet. I don't know if this is a year after the PlayStation has been out, or did it come out this year? Yeah, it came out this year. I don't know if there's been any PlayStations overheat, but I can say personally, mine has not overheat. I've played can't say if I played any graphic intensive games yet. But Returnal, I play it a lot, and I play some Call of Duty on it too. I had it freeze up, but that's been more game issues. It's not been because of anything heat wise. So we'll see next year when like Zero Horizon Dawn comes out, the new God comes out. I think that's it. Only graphic powerhouse game I think coming out is Horizon Dawn.
GPU and CPU with this strategy. The simplest approach would be to look at the actual temperature of the silicon die and throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work. It fails to create a consistent PlayStation 5 experience. It wouldn't do to run a console slower simply because it was in a hot room. So rather than look at the actual temperature of the silicon die, we look at the activities that the GPU and CPU are performing and set the frequencies on that basis, which makes everything deterministic and repeatable. While we're at it, we also use AMD's Smart Shift technology and send any unused power from the CPU to the GPU so it can squeeze out a few more pixels. The benefits of this strategy are quite large. Running a GPU at 2 gigahertz was looking like an unreachable target with the old fixed frequency strategy. With this new paradigm, we're able to run way over that. In fact, we have to cap the GPU frequency at 2.23 gigahertz so that we can guarantee that the on-chip logic operates properly. 36 CUs at 2.23 gigahertz is 10.3 teraflops, and we expect the GPU to spend most of its time at or close to that frequency and performance. Similarly, running the CPU at 3 gigahertz was causing headaches with the old strategy. But now we can run it as high as 3.5 gigahertz. In fact, it spends most of its time at that frequency. That doesn't mean all games will be running at 2.23 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz. When that worst-case game arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To reduce power by 10%, it only takes a couple of percent reduction in frequency, so I'd expect any downclocking to be pretty minor. All things considered, the change to a variable frequency approach will show significant gains for PlayStation gamers. The final of our 3 principles was about finding new dreams. It's important for us on the hardware team to find new ways to expand or deepen gaming, and that's what led us to a focus on 3D audio. As players, we experience the game through the visuals, through audio, and through the feedback we receive from the controller, such as rumble or haptics. Personally, I feel a game is just dead without audio. Visuals are, of course, important, but the impact of audio is huge as well. At the same time, the audio team on a game project has to do a lot with a little. For example, on PlayStation 4, there's fierce competition for the Jaguar CPU cores. Audio typically ends up getting just a fraction of a core. That's not much of a computational resource, particularly when you consider that the visuals run at 30 or 60 frames a second, but audio processing needs to happen at almost 200 times a second. So, it's been tough going making forward progress on audio with PlayStation 4, particularly when PlayStation 3 was such a beast when it came to audio. The SPUs in Cell were almost a perfect device for audio rendering. Simple pipelined algorithms could really take advantage of asynchronous DMA and frequently reached 100% utilization of the floating point unit. There's unfortunately nothing comparable on PlayStation 4. Probably the most dramatic progress in the PlayStation 4 generation has been with virtual reality. The PSVR hardware has its own audio unit. It supports about 50 pretty decent 3D sound sources. And this provided a hint as to where we could go with audio, as well as some valuable experience. Not to oversimplify, but here were our goals for audio on PlayStation 5. The first goal was great audio for everyone, not just VR users or soundbar owners or headphone users. That meant audio had to be part of the console. It couldn't be a peripheral. The second goal was to support hundreds of sound sources. We didn't want developers to have to pick and choose what sounds would get 3D effects and which wouldn't. We wanted every sound in the game to have dimensionality. And finally, we wanted to really take on the challenges of presence and locality. Now, when we say presence, we mean the feeling that you're actually there. You've entered the matrix. It's not, of course, something we thought we could perfectly achieve, but the idea was that if we stopped using just a rain sound and instead used lots of 3D audio sources for raindrops hitting the ground at all sorts of locations around you, then at some point your brain would take a leap and you'd begin to have this feeling of real presence inside the virtual world of the game.
Okay, so let me stop there on the sound aspect. there's there's a lot of videos you can watch on why sound is important, and actually I'm gonna end right here. But there's a lot of videos that you can watch on why sound particularly is important. It doesn't seem like it, but like he's saying, sound in a game is like on a high level watching a car go down the street and you cannot hear it. That's what it's like in games when you don't have the proper sound, or the sound is weak, or it's too loud, or it's too much of it, or it's not in the right spot, or it doesn't come out correctly. For instance, let's say something blows up, right? Let's say in a game you shoot down a huge mothership, right, from Star Wars or something, and it sounds like a firecracker. It's going to sound like more of a joke, right, more than an explosion. Whereas if you have something that, is boom, 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 you hear all these explosions, you get more of the effect of that thing just blew up like that, you know? Massive difference. So when you take things like that and then you incorporate them with this 3D sound that he's talking about, I know this firsthand because while playing Returnal, I played that game in the dark and I wanted to play it with headphones on. Now, Returnal isn't some Resident Evil style game, but with the 3D audio and the way that game was, rain around you, like let's say you had a rock that fell over here and you had a rock that fell over here. Well, with the sound capabilities that the PlayStation 5 has, when that rock fell right here in this area, according to the sound area in 3D space, it can manipulate where that rock fell at. So if a rock fell right there, it sounded like it fell over there. If a rock fell behind me, it sounded like it fell behind me. If you ever get a chance to play Returnal, blow up one of those statues and just listen to the rocks. In a nutshell, listen to the extra fire particles that go across your head. You can hear it, and you can hear it go, not only go past your head, you can hear it go all the way into the distance. So your mind, your brain gets a sense of how far that object is away from you. That's what he's getting at. Again, it's not going to be perfect, but when you put that technology in with like something like VR, where you literally put on a headset and you are in this 3D space and you can turn and move, it really does help. But like you said, with just basic audio headsets, because that's all I had. I had some Turtle Beaches. It really was immersion. Um, it really was immersion. I think that's the reason why people have trouble in that game, because it's naturally like space and unknown and spooky. And when you put yourself in it, it's a fun game, but you'll have a fun time with the sounds. But yeah, we're gonna end the video here. This is video 4. Kicking off, continue on with the sound, and should be finishing the video maybe this next one if I don't do too much talking. So again, hope that you learned something, and I'm gonna put some links in this video, in these videos. So maybe you can go through and deepen your learning of this, because that's what my point of me going through this again is to actually learn what these systems are. Because as I develop my personal games, I want to be able to utilize this stuff now and as technology keep going. Because who knows, we might actually see a PlayStation 6 or an Xbox Scorpio 2. All right.